fucking awesome. Come on, it's gonna be fucking awesome. You know the words. It's gonna be fucking awesome. That's it, see. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Yeah!
All right, everybody, it's your boy, Jesse Blaze Snider, the Coolest Geek Alive. How you doing out there? I am doing pretty good. I'm finally kind of getting over being sick, feeling a little bit better. And I'm excited to talk about this because, I don't know, it finally completely clicked for me because at the time that the Marvels was announced as a replacement for Captain Marvel 2, I wasn't sure if I thought it was a good idea or not. I didn't think about it very deeply, but I was just sort of like, interesting. The one thing that I was sure that it was an admission of Captain Marvel's low-key secret failure. And now, there's things about Captain Marvel that most people don't know. But at the time that film came out, they built a marketing campaign around its release, similar to the marketing campaign that grew out of Black Panther naturally, but they tried to manufacture it with women. It was, considered a cultural movement for the black community or whatever. I don't know how true that is or isn't. I know that everybody freaking loved Black Panther. I think we all loved Black Panther, and I think it was a part of the entirety of the culture. I don't think it was necessarily a black thing. I actually think, honestly, that making it a black thing really is racist and really makes it, undermines how freaking monumental and cool it is in and of itself. Because the Black Panther character is awesome. He's awesome because he's a great character. He's got really interesting circumstances to which he has to abide, which is essentially he's a king, so he has all these constituents, all these people who are beneath him that he must appease, essentially. Tradition, history of his culture, whatever the things are, he has to honor that stuff. Plus, he's a member of the Avengers. Granted, he had joined the Avengers to watch them, which was a detail that got introduced later on by Christopher Priest. But at the same time, he's a moral guy. He always does the right thing. There's a bit where the Illuminati, the original Illuminati in the comics, which are awesome, really mishandled in the films. If you saw the Doctor Strange movie, that board of Professor X and Iron Man, these guys exist in the comics. And one of the early things where you see them, they invite Black Panther to join, and he's like, no. Like, this is really messed up. The most powerful people in the universe with the most power in their hands are getting together to make a board to decide whether or not people are allowed to do things. Like, this is a slippery slope. And that's, such a cool move and such a Black Panther move, recognizing a larger allegiance to people outside of the room, not just his own morality. I love T'Challa, always have. He's one of my favorite characters. Love the visual, just really simple silhouette, that Panther costume. I especially love the really beautiful redesign that Mark Texiera, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that guy's name right because it's like a Hispanic spelling, I think, sometimes. I don't know. When like some things are written a certain way and you go, I don't know, I'm not going to get this right. So I think it's Mark Texiera. He's one of my favorite artists. I love this dude. I don't know if he's painting, but there is this, I don't know, royal kingly version with a lot of gold, and it's beautiful. That costume in particular really just made me fall in love with the character. There's a great cover that he did, and I just always remember the gold eyes. Instead of white eyelids in the Black Panther costume, he had gold eyes underneath the in his pupils. I mean, I like Black Panthers too as an animal. Like, they're one of my favorite animals in the wild, and I just think a person in a Black Panther costume is just a really good idea. And I know it seems so simple. It's a simple animal motif, but it's a cool motif. It's like this walking shadow with claws, and there's something cool about that character. So I really do believe that Black Panther was just always ready for prime time. However, Captain Marvel wasn't, and I'm gonna talk to you about Captain Marvel because I've gotten like no negative skin in this game. Carol Danvers is not one of my favorite characters, but I didn't have anything against her. I never did. I was just always kind of waiting for somebody to do something fun with her in the comic books because not much fun had really been done. So much of the things about her that were exciting was her relationship to the original Captain Marvel. And I'm going to go through just kind of the publication history so you can get a look at everything in a second. But Captain Marvel, who existed for a minute, he was a beloved character by, plenty of people. He had a decent length run. And he died in the death of Captain Marvel, which was one of the big, kind of, I don't know, pivotal moments in Marvel publishing, because it was them making a big deal about a death. It was a character that people liked. It was really well handled, and it was released as Marvel's first graphic novel. So I wasn't around to pick it up at the time or anything. So I don't know the significance firsthand on that level, but this was historically something that, I heard about after the fact. And, I remember my first introduction to Captain Marvel was him as one of the dead heroes, importantly dead. There are people in like these mythologies like Barry Allen originally who died in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that was a really big deal, a linchpin death in the universe. Captain Marvel's death was similar to that. Similar to a death like Uncle Ben or Bucky, who, we never thought would come back, but of course he did eventually come back. But that doesn't change really the legacy that was there. Springing out of Captain Marvel, you have other Captain Marvels, kind of similar to that Captain Marvel, and you've got the Monica Rambeau, and you've got Carol Danvers, and you've got Carol Danvers' little sidekick, that's coming up in her new comic, and Kamala Kahn, so there's like a big legacy from this space. And Marvel realized at some point, I guess somebody said, hey, that character's name is Marvel. That's our name. And they went, yeah. Captain Marvel, the namesake. It's funny. The original Captain Marvel was not created by Marvel Comics. The original Captain Marvel was one of the biggest characters of all time at time. Captain Marvel from Fawcett Comics. He was a really beautiful answer to something that was seen as a thread of success in comics, which was sidekicks. Sidekicks, the success was seen as the children have an immediate connection to the story. They are in it, and they are experiencing Batman, they are experiencing Superman, whoever it might be, as the sidekick to them as a little kid reading it, that this was a vicarious experience. Well, Fawcett had a better idea. They said, what if little kid says a word, becomes Superman? Right? Good idea. So Captain Marvel was born, and Captain Marvel would say his magic word, which was Shazam. Captain Marvel ended up being super successful. And even as they began to get sued by DC Comics because DC felt that Shazam was too similar to Superman, which is hysterical because nowadays that would never happen. Nobody would like the differences between Superman and Shazam are plenty enough for them to not be sued. And granted, this thing never really went down like purely. There was certain points that the judge was going to have them fight, but Fawcett Comics just like they were like, we can't do it. They couldn't do it financially anymore. But during that period of time, they actually, I think, had the first TV show. Like there was a Shazam TV show before there was even a Superman show, and that character became very successful. It ultimately became underneath the ownership of DC Comics publisher, and they didn't really do anything with it for a long time. And then somewhere along the way, Captain Marvel was introduced in some of the Marvel specials. Let me see. I wrote down something here. So let's see. You get the original Captain Marvel from Fawcett Comics in 39. And now you get Marvel, the original Captain Marvel, who starred in his own series for a total of 62 issues. Now, this is the Annette Benet character in the film. Okay? The Annette Benet character. And I told you before that there was some trickery going on. There was lots of empty theaters at the time that Captain Marvel came out. I believe that they were able to create enough of a hype machine that a lot of people did go see Captain Marvel, and the majority of the people who did were sort of disappointed that we did and very underwhelmed by it. It was the first film to really break away from the Marvel formula, which was giving a general best of version of the character. And Annette Benet, or whoever it was, the elderly actress who is like the representative of the mind of the Kree intelligence that Carol Danvers is dealing with in the thing. Boy, does that do a disservice to a character that is beloved, who starred in his own series for a total of 62 issues. Now, 62 issues, and then they killed him because he was liked, and they wanted to make it a big event. They did it as a thing, but 62 issues, that's a lot. And you'll see in a second, because I'm going to kind of go through the history of all this shit in a minute. And 62 issues, remember that's a lot. It really is, and so I just have a whole bunch of notes here. Series began with Marvel Superheroes number 12 in December 1967. So, many years later, this name Captain Marvel has laid dormant, but it is originally associated with another character, which is important because this is a real deluge of this whole Captain Marvel concept, and there's Marvel Man, and there's a lot of murkiness in this whole copyright and trademark for this character name. It's weird actually that it didn't get used, and then Marvel used it. DC decided, fuck it, we're not going to sue them at the time, and then at a certain point it was like, well, we can't sue them anymore, because it's crazy. They owned Captain Marvel. I don't understand how they didn't sue them when they were doing the Captain Marvel thing. I think it was just probably just too busy doing other shit and not paying attention. I mean, that's the biggest thing I've found as a professional comic book writer in the business, is most of the people who I would work with often, on one level or another, they weren't paying attention to things. And you didn't want to correct these people. It's not meanness to say that, well, they didn't notice. They didn't read that book. They weren't aware of this. They weren't aware of that. Because I would try to do things because I was aware of this, so I would make an adjustment here. And these adjustments often wouldn't be appreciated because they weren't aware of the things that I was aware of. But it's no fault on their own. Most of the people in the business are really scared for their jobs and being pushed way too hard and stretched way too thin, and aren't allowed to make a lot of decisions, and every decision they try to make ends up getting taken out from under them, and that screws the creative people around them that they try to work with, and screws their relationships. And it's a whole freaking thing working as a freelancer in comic books and in anywhere, in film. And me and my brother Cody, who's a brilliant filmmaker, we were talking the other day. Your homework assignment, if you choose to accept it, go watch my brother Cody's short film Fool's Day. Greatest short film ever made. It's amazing, hysterical, you'll enjoy. But Cody and I, we were talking, and basically everything he was saying, I was like, oh my god, that's everything I've experienced in comics. It's the exact same thing. I know it's every industry. It's all like this. It's a lot of not creative people trying to create from the sidelines, trying to control the creative vision so they can say they had something to do with it, and invariably making sort of major mistakes. Okay, so you get 67. We get Captain Marvel, and he continues with Captain Marvel Volume 1 in 68, which has, a number 1 issue, goes for 62 issues. And then Captain Marvel ends with 62, issue number 62 in 1979. And so Marvel's solo series ran for approximately 11 years. Okay, so think about this like this. It's like don't think about the 62 issues thing. Think about for 11 years, Captain Marvel, this guy, he's got a really great costume. I always love the Captain Marvel costume. He's got his blonde hair sticking out of the top, white eye shields, so you don't see his eyes, but you see his mouth, and really great blue-red with some gold highlines, his negabands. This character was on the shelf for 11 years. 11 years, every time somebody walked into a comic book store, even if they didn't read it or whatever, they saw this character. This character participated in the crossover events, Secret Wars, and whatever other things that it might be at the time. He's showing up in other series. There was a push for him. For 11 years he's around, and some people come to have affection for him. Now, this is way longer than any of the other Captain Marvel series. Like, way longer. You have no idea. I'm about to take you through it, okay? So, Marvel Superheroes number 13, which is the issue right after Captain Marvel is introduced in Marvel Superheroes number 12, in 67, we meet Carol Danvers. So she's immediately in the picture the next issue after we meet Marvel. She's part of his origin. I've said in the past, they really should have done a one-and-done adaptation of the death of Captain Marvel with a thing designed to hand over the franchise to Carol by the end of it. Would have been a great way to go about things. I really don't think that going back in time and giving her all this like false pretense as like being historically the first Avenger and all this stuff, I really just think all that shoehorned in. Nobody loved any of that stuff. For your guys' information, as a fan, and this is the thing, because I buy toys, because I hit the comic book store every Wednesday, I know what the fans think. I've been talking and getting a general consensus of people of all variety, and I have a general idea of whether or not things are really exciting people or if things are not so much exciting people. And I can tell you that despite a lot of effort being put into making Carol Danvers and Kamala Kahn in particular, making those two characters happen for the last like 15 years or something like that. So much energy has gone into like, we're gonna make them happen. And they have, not only have they not done a good job at accomplishing this, they have actually done major harm to the characters along the way. Case in point, with they did a follow-up to the Civil War from the comics, which if you've never read Civil War, it's kind of just a fun place to start as a random story to read of the Marvel Universe. It's right in the middle of lots of great stuff that was going on at the time, at the height of many different wonderful Marvel writers who were working there at the time of Joe Quesada's editorial reign. It was really great, but you can jump in and just read Civil War, and it's a great book. They did a follow-up to it just a little while after that, and honestly, I didn't read it. It was just as, for the first time ever, I had to take a pause on my buying books because I literally had a long box full of books that I hadn't been able to get to yet because I was so busy. And I just also was a little underwater financially, and I was feeling guilty about spending so much money on these books. So I'm like, cut. And that was that time period for myself where I cut down on things. And this was... this series, Civil War 2, was the series that made me feel like, all right, cool, good time that I decided to stop putting my money into these books. Because in the Civil War 2 story, there always has to be a good guy, bad guy, but the original Civil War, you could kind of get behind so much of what was going on based on a couple of the things that had happened leading up to it with Captain America and Iron Man and Iron Man's pigheadedness and like you could forgive Iron Man for doing what he was doing. But the second time around, the Civil War #2 was way more like people forcing other people against their will, in a way more direct way, and Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, became the militant military face of what you might call an analog to like the Nazi Party. And Kamala Kahn, by virtue, became one of the Hitler Youth, who was like in lockstep with what her mentor said. Which, if you were going to do a story like this, you needed to have Kamala Kahn not in lockstep going, say it ain't so, I looked up to you, I can't believe that you did this, and then her ultimately going, man, you're right, I shouldn't have done this, I never should have done this, what a terrible lesson I learned, and really learn something from it, and be sort of like beholden to whatever, and then you learn something from the character of Kamala Kahn and her sweetness and changes things, but instead, you had this woman going, yeah, I'm proudly, vehemently on the side of the government that wants to control my friends, people who I've known for a really long time. So she was essentially viewed as like having turned her back on lots of her friends and stuff. I mean, it's funny, when stories like this happen, I just forget about them because I'm like, I don't want to hate Carol Danvers. I like Carol Danvers okay. You know, the things that we do like about Carol Danvers up to this point was that she was honoring the mantle of somebody who we did like, Captain Marvel. Was that she was a badass, powerful female who would, be batting utility for the Avengers and showing up and getting things done the right way, was always moral, was always cool. Like there was never any trouble with Carol. She was like an ancillary character who we appreciated, but she didn't necessarily have her own stories. Her biggest story was actually getting put into a coma by Rogue, who has the suck your powers thing. Remember in the animated series, which is so cool, and Rogue is always so awesome when she's depicted as the powerhouse with the super strength and flying around. She stole those powers from Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. That was a good place to come from, to put me on the spot and sit here and pontificate about what they should have done with the character, from there to make her mean something to the audience. I don't know exactly what it is. I'd have to think about it. I'm really just here to give you an autopsy of what has definitely gone wrong. But I'll tell you something. It's definitely from what they would do or could do coming out of this thing. They did a couple things that were, I think, good ideas. The first idea was elevating her as a leader on the Mighty Avengers that was coming out at the time. She's now leading the Avengers. I think that was a great idea for her. I think she could have been set up as a similar sort of Captain America type in a positive way. Again, just a bunch of years later, they're going to do this Civil War II thing, and they're going to butcher the character on that Captain America front thing, where she's literally on that opposite side, the Iron Man side, not the Captain America side, just kind of going with what the Gestapo says thing. And that, I think that really, really hurt the character. But thing one of making her leader of the Avengers, that was cool. I think people were down for that change. That was an upgrade to her. That was cool. And giving her the name and the mantle officially of Captain Marvel, that was really cool. Because right after this series was made, or sorry, not this series, the original series was made of Captain Marvel in 68, and ending in 79. They did, what is it? Hold on, because I'm just looking at my notes. I didn't think about something. Oh, yeah, okay. So Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, as Miss Marvel, she gets her powers in Captain Marvel number 18, of that run with Captain Marvel in 69. So think of the history here. 11 years, somewhere into that 11 years, like 3 years into that 11 years, 18 issues. Oh no, okay, we'll say a year and a half into that that run, you get Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, as a superpowered character who's like assistant to Captain Marvel, and then they're there as like character and side character and supporting character or whatever. There's 11 years or let's see, 9 years of them being together, doing some stories. Wouldn't it not have been appropriate to include this character in the Marvel Universe? Would it not have been appropriate to have dramatically at least dedicated one film to doing a good job with him and his story and getting that right and using that as a great vehicle to introduce us to Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, in a follow-up film? I think that would have been a way better idea. Anyway, so the original Miss Marvel series starring Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel ran for a total of 23 issues. So this is Miss Marvel. And you know what? I didn't look up if there was multiple volumes of Miss Marvel. I think there probably were. I definitely read a Miss Marvel comic book prior to reading what would be the launched and relaunched Captain Marvel issues that came after this stuff. Let me see, one second. I don't know. I'm getting conflicting information, so I'm just going to move on. So Marvel, he doesn't actually die until 1982, which was the year I was born, baby, in the death of Captain Marvel. And, when he dies, it is a big deal, as I said. Around the same time, they introduced Monica Rambeau in Amazing Spider-Man Annual 16. Now, the second volume of the Captain Marvel series, which featured Monica Rambeau as Captain Marvel, ran for a total of 2 issues. I think it was just kind of a promotional deal. It started with Captain Marvel Volume 2, Number 1 in November 1989, and it concludes with issue Number 2 in December 1989. Now, the Monica Rambeau series as Captain Marvel in the 1980s, it only had 2 issues, but it was the beginning of her taking the Captain Marvel mantle. She was actually the first person to have the Captain Marvel mantle, Monica Rambeau, and there's obviously an argument that perhaps they could have set up the first movie and made the first black female superhero as that could have been cool. And it's interesting that is actually what happened in the comics first. Monica Rambeau, black female, she was actually the first Captain Marvel, but they chose who they chose. And it's just once you start thinking on any of these levels to make these choices, it opens you up to being sort of judged for why and how all these choices were arrived at, as opposed to they were arrived at because it was the most natural answer, and it was wonderful diversity of life and we were excited. Okay, great. But that's not often how it's being done, unfortunately. So let's see. Obviously, Monica Rambeau, she was guest starring in the Avengers and in Spider-Man and whatnot as Captain Marvel for a little while. Eventually, her name would be switched over to Photon. But technically speaking, she was the second Captain Marvel. Now, my personal favorite Captain Marvel was the 3rd volume of Captain Marvel series, which was written by Peter David. It's freaking awesome. It was drawn by Chris Cross, who's one of my favorite artists who I actually got to work with on a thing or two here or there. I know Chris. He's a great dude. Genus Vell. Genus Vell he's the dude, if you've ever seen, he's got like space in his face. It looks like stars, and he's got white hair, and he's got that same beautiful red and blue Captain Marvel suit, except all of the black or dark blue spaces are decked out to be more like space. This run by Peter David was really fun. It looked great. It was I don't know if the original Captain Marvel series was like this because I didn't read it, but they would bang their negabands together and they would switch places with somebody. I'm pretty sure it was similar to this thing. And in this case, it was Rick Jones, and I don't know if Rick Jones was the first guy. Like, okay, let me find out this. I want to know. Okay, so it was Rick Jones too, and it was Rick Jones in the run that I read. This was the story. It was a really great story. It's some of my favorite comics that I've ever read were these Captain Marvel stories. And granted, they could have eventually done this story or whatnot, but this was apparently ultimately the basic premise of the original Captain Marvel as well. When they would click their wrists together, Captain Marvel, who was stuck in the negative zone, would come out of the negative zone and be able to fight crime on behalf of Rick. Similar sort of thing happens with Genus Vell, who's his son, I guess. And I love those issues. And actually, as I say this, I'm like, I got to go back and read the original Captain Marvel stuff, because I know that stuff's really considered classic, and I always meant to go back and read it, but I just never got a chance. So putting it to the top of my list, because that excites me. I suspect they're really good, because it was very good. Just the switching things. What happened to you? Where were you? And then Captain Marvel was here. Like, I smocked my bands together and I disappeared, and I got stuck there for multiple weeks. And now I'm starving. There's like some really funny and great bits in the Peter David run by the Captain Marvel run by Peter David, with a lot of Chris Cross artwork in it. I highly recommend. The thing was on the verge of cancellation forever, just like that Deadpool series, but it kept surviving because it had such a rabid fan base, and that's because the book was really good. That one's worth going back and checking out. And I suspect that original Captain Marvel run was worth going and checking out. I was really hoping they were going to do some adaptation of the death of Captain Marvel, but for whatever reason they didn't do that. So anyway, This is the history, and we know what happened. So the third volume is with Genus Vell, who I told you I love. This series runs for 35 issues, okay? So the original Captain Marvel series, 11 years, and what was it, 62 issues or something like that? Yeah, 62 issues. So now we go from 62 issues down to 35 issues, okay? A little more than half. And this is in 95 for volume 3. Now, I love this book, and this book was almost canceled multiple times. So total 35 issues. Granted, they did a couple of those. No, yeah, I guess this would all be included in the amount of issues that were there. 35 issues, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got a fourth volume of the Captain Marvel series now, which features Captain Marvel's as played by Carol Danvers. Now, this one, the first attempt at this, would go for 35 issues. And like I said, this was a good idea. This was a good idea to upgrade her to Captain Marvel, and make her leader of the Avengers. This was really cool. But these first 35 issues, and I'm pretty positive I read all of them, I don't remember anything that happened. I mean, like that's why I say I'm pretty positive, because I was reading, I thought it was a Miss Marvel series prior to this. I remember there was some great Frank Cho covers where she just looks so beautiful. That's usually why I read cover. I just remember going, oh my God, she looks like so gorgeous. Everything Frank Cho draws, this, like, the women look so, like, incredible looking. Like, apparently in whatever in my mind's eye a woman looks like, that's what Frank Cho draws. And I'm like, oh my God, beautiful women. And I remember there being some, I don't remember if it was Miss Marvel where I started reading Miss Marvel, but I was interested in Miss Marvel. I thought it was interesting that she had gone through that difficult time with Rogue having, like, put her in a coma and took her powers and stuff, and that she didn't have her powers for a little while. She'd lost her powers. I don't know what it was that they should do from that space, but it's definitely probably has to come from that way, because that's how we know her as an audience member. And granted, she comes back and she gets upgraded and they give her a series, but it doesn't really go down right. Now, at this point, you would think that they would kind of rejigger things and try again with somebody, who's got some slightly more interesting ideas and do it again. No. They come back with basically the same idea. This time, a volume 4 lasts for 25 issues. Okay. Or is this, I'm sorry, no, that's volume 5 lasts for 25 issues. All right. So now volume 6 lasts for 17 issues. Volume 7 lasts for 15 issues. Volume 8 lasts for 10 issues. And I mean, volume 9 does go back up to 28 issues, but then we've got what? That's 2019. That we got the 28 issues. So we're getting a reboot right now, which means at best their last attempt was 24 issues. Traditionally speaking, when you can't get a series to last more than 24 issues, more than this sort of, it started at 32, Captain Marvel was eventually canceled at 62 issues because it wasn't really able to get a large enough fan base, and they were like, all right, we'll rest this concept and maybe we'll come back to it. Nowadays, Marvel has a much more aggressive rest the concept, come back to it. It's maybe like a month. Maybe it's a little longer than that. They've brought back Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers over and over and over again. And each time they really shoulda, coulda, I was waiting for them to get Grant Morrison to come in and do something really interesting with the character. There was a minute where Brian Michael Bendis was making Carol Danvers a supporting character in the Alias comic book, and she kind of had a little bit of a feeling of like more real world women, like modern feminist women like you would see on something like Sex and the City or whatever, which was weird because the character had generally been depicted previously as kind of like militant, and now she was like militant and oddly a girl's girl with a sex life. And like, I mean, clearly she probably had a sex life before, but you would imagine like her sex life was kind of maybe buttoned up, and now it was like, oh no, she's just one of the girls who happens to be a military person. So I thought this was kind of a little bit of a clashing thing, though at the time it seemed like a promise of something to be done with her, interestingly, but it didn't really seem to help her. Like she just got used as an ancillary character who was almost like a superficial look at the Marvel Universe, because she would depict the Marvel Universe in really weird, superficial ways that she saw it. She was looking around and I'm on this team with all these big dudes and blah, blah, blah. Like, it was really like the way that she would frame the universe from this modern perspective wasn't super awesome. And none of these series took off. I think a couple times they tried to relaunch the series with the same creative team, even though the initial creative team and the initial take on the book wasn't really flying in the first place. I've never really seen anything particularly interesting done with the series. I can only vouch for having read probably the first 3 volumes of all these volumes. I think I read that first run I definitely read the first run of Genus Fells for 35 issues, and I definitely read the first Carol Danvers for 35 issues, and I think I read the next 25 issues as well as at least some of the next 17 issues. And I can tell you it was not great. It wasn't a great book, even though I wanted to like it. I wanted to like it very much. I did think it was a good idea that they should have this, flagship title for Marvel Comics. I thought that was a cool endeavor of like, this lady has your name, make it count. But it never went to that place. I don't know what would have done it. I think probably bigger villains and bigger stakes, and just in general, I just remember the series just being so forgettable month in and month out. And every solicitation that I've seen for the volumes after that, and there are so many now, I mean, they'll update her costume, they give her a new haircut, and new people working on the covers, but I've never seen them put a creative team on this book that would bring in your average comic book reader on the merit of the writing that was being offered on these books. And forgive me if there's any of your favorite writers that wrote these books, but they're not lasting. They're not holding an audience. You can see what the audience at large thinks of these writers and these, these creative teams, and how this has gone down. And they've been trying to make Captain Marvel happen for this long. And right alongside her, we've got Miss Marvel. Now, like I said, I feel like I had been reading a Miss Marvel series or had at some point, which starred Carol Danvers, because Carol Danvers was originally Miss Marvel. She was Miss Marvel for a long time. She got her powers. It took like a year or something like that, or 2 years later, or a year and a half, I think I said earlier. And then he was alive with the comic book adventures for 11 years. And she was Miss Marvel after that, because Captain Marvel Photon became Captain Marvel, the Monica Rambeau. She was Captain Marvel first for a little while, and then nobody had that moniker, and eventually it was given to her. So she was Miss Marvel for a long time. A lot of people know her as Miss Marvel. I think she even showed up on some animated series that were made as Miss Marvel. Could be wrong about that. But in the volume, I think it's volume 7, number 14, Kamala Kahn is introduced. And that's like 2013 or 2014. I was getting conflicting numbers on some of these things as I was writing things down, and I was like, I have so much information. Who gives a shit what year it was exactly? It's around that year. They introduced Kamala Kahn. Kamala Kahn will star in her own series, which will launch in 2014. Be canceled and relaunched in 2015, canceled and relaunched in 2016, and I'm sure they've done that a few more times since. This character has never taken flight with the fans. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I think maybe she isn't necessarily taking flight with fans. I think her powers were sort of a weird weird choice. They gave her, like, I don't know, it's like I can make all my body parts get all swollen powers. Like, she looks swollen. She's like, here's my swollen fist and my swollen foot and my, like, she like, it's like they gave her grotesque body morphing powers. Which I think for the tone of what this character's meant to be and what the book's meant to be, which is like this sweet kind of squirrel girl looking up to her favorite superhero, Captain Marvel, and being adorable and sweet. I think something that played more to cuteness would have gone a long way to sell her character and make it connect with people, for one. For another, I think her strange connection with the Inhumans and being in a lost Inhuman was just sort of like a weird, a strange connection to the Marvel Universe. Again, the Inhumans are these creepy characters that have powers kind of like this and stuff, like, so her powers make sense with that, but the powers, I think, were part of why audience didn't necessarily like love her. She just kind of had a weird vibe about her. I think they could have done something cute and fun and focused on character, and I think they played her really safe in a lot of ways. And she's just kind of like a bland, I love this character who's got really kind of weird powers that I don't think were visually compelling enough to really bring a series forward. A series is all about the visual component, and case in point, Mr. Fantastic, he shares the book with 3 other characters. He's got a rock character, he's got his invisible wife, and he's got the Human Torch. So there's a lot of textures and dynamic going on a cover for any Fantastic Four thing. And with Plastic Man, he's this crazy comedy character. So let's say you're doing a cover and you're the Kyle Baker run of Plastic Man, which is awesome. Another great thing for you to check out if you ever want to check out some really funny comic books. The Plastic Man by Kyle Baker is amazing. And let's say those covers, they're really over the top, comedic, whatever else. This character was way more aimed at like an all ages teen audience. You needed to make a character that appealed to sort of teen boys and teen girls, I think, at the same time. And instead we got somebody who I don't think necessarily is super appealing on a character level to anybody. Because in general, it's like you want to see their adventures because it's something you'd like to see. And somebody with making their body parts swell powers isn't necessarily the thing. Especially not when it's a cute girl who we're supposed to sort of view that way. So really, right off the bat, I do think her powers did have an awful lot to do with why it doesn't exactly work. But then from there, they haven't really done anything with the character that's made anybody excited, and they haven't done putting a Grant Morrison or somebody really capable of bringing some interesting new ideas to bear to create something here. Now, I've talked about in the past, there are storylines in the comics from Marvel, DC, and independent comic companies that fans of comics, comic readers, we're clamoring to see this stuff brought to life. We would love to see Carol Danvers lose her powers. We would have loved to see Captain Marvel get introduced in the death of Captain Marvel. These are sort of greatest hits moments of the Marvel Universe. We would love to see Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers' version, introduced alongside all these other characters and her sidekicks and stuff like that, because those are all at least pivotal moments within the Marvel Universe that established the concept of Captain Marvel and that power, this power that they're all tapping into. And we were down for those things. When you took the initial movie and you decided not to actually give us the foundational pieces of Captain Marvel and Carol Danvers inheriting the mantle of Captain Marvel from Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel, who existed in publication for over 11 years, for 62 issues, more than Carol Danvers ever did, was more of a success than Carol Danvers ever was. I understand you really want to push Carol Danvers, and that's all well and good because there is history for that. But we should have done the death of Captain Marvel, and then in the meantime, after we did a really successful death of Captain Marvel and introduced Captain Marvel, we get freaking Grant Morrison or Warren Ellis or somebody really spectacular to come in and write some definitive Captain Marvel stories, like a few of them, that you could make some films on in the future, because we don't really have that here. We have diminishing returns. We have Captain Marvel having to cancel sooner and sooner and sooner based on the sales. And I remember I used to read, and I still look at these numbers when I can get a hold of them. They're just a little bit harder to get a hold of sometimes now. The numbers for all the publications that were coming out at the time. I always wanted to know, what were the actual sales? How many people were actually reading these books? Who was looking at whatever? And I remember Captain Marvel like over and over again, and laughing at the comic book store with friends of like, man, they just will not let this die. And they're not getting it that they really need to bring some fresh ideas to Captain Marvel to make her more than what she is right now, which is a potential great leader for the Avengers because she's got some history in the Marvel Universe. She's a great legacy. She's a competent and cool character who, generally speaking, outside of Civil War II, the audience, likes and accepts, but she doesn't have the definitive stories that make her anything. Superman, I just did a whole 45 minutes talking about some of the great Superman stories. There are no stories like that for Carol Danvers. I can't devote any amount of time to telling you the great Carol Danvers stories. If I could make 5 great Carol Danvers stories, they would all be her in the Avengers, or her getting her powers taken by the X-Men, or her as a subordinate to Captain Marvel. Or like I can't remember the other ones the way I can remember some of her appearances and some of the other things. They've tried to do a bunch of things with her. I've actually read probably 100 issues of comic books starring Carol Danvers, and I can't remember a lot of them because they weren't great. And this is one of my favorite characters is She-Hulk. I'm not anti-woman. Like I was I was reading those books. I picked those books up, right? So I'm a guy, and I bought Captain Marvel for a long period of time, and I read it, and it just wasn't great. Just wasn't great. They never got it right. They needed somebody to come in. I looked at, I think I probably only read like the first series or first few issues or whatever it was of the Kamala Kahn Miss Marvel. It just was very cutesy, infantile, and it relied a lot on like being super into Captain Marvel, which I wasn't. Even after years of reading it, it wasn't making me excited, and that character didn't make me excited. I remember just really mostly not loving her powers and being in love with it. Like I'm gonna stare at a comic book with just the swollen fists of this young girl for like it just didn't seem like anything I really wanted to look at all the time. And I think in comics you have to take these things into consideration. I don't think that Kamala Khan's visual was considered from the standpoint of a comic book reader and what we might like to see. I think it was considered from other standpoints of inclusion and diversity, and that's cool and all well-meaning things. But unfortunately, the audience is not there. The audience is not connected with this stuff. So the book was just relaunched again, this Captain Marvel starring Carol Danvers. I think there's just a few issues in. And it's relaunched 4 times in 10 years? So it's like 2.5 years at a time. This is telling you something, is it not? I mean, and if you go look at the comic book numbers, I mean, what it was back when I was reading that was getting it canceled was in the sometimes as low as the 15,000s, but getting under into the 30,000s. Now the numbers are so much lower today for these publications, and it's so crazy because when you get these numbers so low, the amount of people who are actually reading the books really get low. So even when like when it gets this low, and then there's also PR propaganda, characters in the landscape who are doing reviews because they're basically in cahoots with these comic book companies. They exchange free goods for giving them reviews that they might like. And they've built up enough of an audience to put out the word about these things. Most of these websites, just in general, they'll never say anything bad because they like to be part of the access media and have access to any of these major companies and the comic books and creators and people that are associated with them. So they just keep really good relationships with everybody, and it doesn't help the material to be any better. Okay, that's what I'll say about that. Now, Carol has ultimately ended up just this strange sort of militant feminist that I don't think does her character a lot of favors, and I think the success of her ongoing or lack thereof has demonstrated that. They have refused to give up on it despite the fact that the audience isn't biting. They've refused to give up on Miss Marvel even though the audience isn't biting. But on we go. Now, it's funny, though, because they've totally pulled the punch here with this film. This was supposed to be Captain Marvel 2, and instead it's the Marvels. And I wasn't sure at the time that change was made of if maybe it was a good idea, but I don't think it was. I think Captain Marvel 2, since we have actually gone through the motions of Captain Marvel 1, it is a family-friendly film, and the idea that we would get introduced to her little sidekick and her friend, whatever, like if we saw a trailer for that, most of the people have seen Captain Marvel. We didn't necessarily like it, but now we saw a trailer, and there was also, okay, here's Monica Rambeau, the little color, and okay, here's a little kid here. We got a nice little mix here. This is cool. She's got some friends, and then some good villains, right? Like the Marvels, like who's the villain in the Marvels? I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. I haven't seen a villain in the trailer. Like villains would have gone a long way to making the Marvels something that Marvel fans might have wanted to see. I realized that by calling the film The Marvels and making it about all 3 of them, you essentially set people up to be like, what? Who are they? Because most of them might recognize Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, as played by Brie Larson, And again, we don't necessarily love that, but there's familiarity there. But then the audience size of something like WandaVision, which was the most successful of all of the Marvel Disney Plus shows, I'm pretty sure, is still infinitesimal compared to the films. It's really small. Who's that woman? Who's this photon character? They don't know. Who's Kamala Kahn? Kamala Kahn, meanwhile, she had the lowest ratings. Her ratings were really, really, really low. Like thousands. No, like not a lot of people know who this character is. So the Marvels, it makes you feel like, oh, well, if I'm going to go watch that, I think I got to go watch the Kamala Kahn show, and I got to go watch this. And now there's the Secret Invasion show people hated that. People hated Secret Invasion, and that ostensibly picked up on storylines from Captain Marvel. And again, now, because it's the Marvels and not Captain Marvel 2, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's a natural that we're going to pick up on storylines there. But holy crap, guys. I mean, really, I think they should have stuck with Captain Marvel 2. I think Captain Marvel 2 would have still been a big failure, but maybe not as big a failure as the Marvels is going to be. And it's funny, I play a game with my kids called Marvel Snap, which is really super fun. It's been like collecting Marvel cards again with my kids this time. I got them into Marvel cards when they were little. I had bought a box of Marvel Series 1 and a box of Marvel Series 2 to play with them when they got a little bit older and traded with them. And I think I've encouraged a life of trading with my children. So we have been drawn to Marvel Snap. I forget the type of game you call it, but basically there's like 3 ports, and each port has different rules, and you got this deck of 12 cards, and over time you'll have a collection of hundreds of cards, but you'll just be playing 12 at a time, essentially 12 that are in your deck. And it's really fun. You collect all these Marvel cards. There's a little bit of communication between you and the people that you're playing, which are in mostly real people that you're playing against. And they can communicate using, I think, like a dozen little word balloons, which are very limited and very light on meanness. They're all meant to be very positive, generally. Oh, I'm going to lose and all this stuff. But they end up being used sarcastically, and it is so infuriating, some of these stupid things that you'll get sent, because you'll get like, oh, I'm going to lose from somebody as they're about to destroy you. And then like 2 seconds later, they've got 1,000 points, and you're like, you're going to lose, you dick. And one of the things that they have done in this Marvel Snap game, which does no favors to the Marvels, is they've got Kamala Kahn, Miss Marvel, giving this big, over-the-top thumbs up with a big smile, thumbs up, and everybody uses it as a fuck you to the other people on Marvel Snap. So when you get that Kamala Kahn thumbs up, it's like, I just beat your ass. Peace. And it just makes you hate the character that much more. Like, I didn't hate the Kamala Kahn character until Marvel Snap. Now I hate Kamala Kahn. I'm like, damn you, Kamala Kahn. If you play Marvel Snap and you've ever got Kamala Kahn, you know why. Marvel Snap is really cool because it reframes a lot of the way you're looking at these characters and their relationships in respect to how the relationships with the cards work, and it makes for some really interesting relationships that I never imagined envisioning as these two things go together. But there's a lot of these two things go together that don't make sense but are wonderful. I highly recommend Marvel Snap, especially if you're a dad who's sometimes away from their children, and like I can be sometimes. It's just such a wonderful way to connect with them, and me and them are always constantly sharing the variant cards that we got and the different new cards that we've gotten and plateaus that we've reached, and super, super fun. But anyway, that game is not doing Kamala Kahn any favors, not doing the Marvels any favors, and honestly, I think this film is just going to crash and burn, but I do think it would have done a little bit better had they not made the change and called it the Marvels. They should have just stuck with Captain Marvel 2, let her be the boss-ass bitch that she's supposed to be. I think this really sends a message to your audience, and I knew this the moment the announcement was made, that we don't really believe in this thing. And if you don't really believe in the thing, well, why are you doing it? They really just should have rested this character, let a little bit of time pass, and moved on to greener pastures. Anyway, this is Jesse Blaze Snider, the Coolest Geek Alive. I'm really excited to come at you every Wednesday, every Saturday with new awesome geek culture content. Past few weekends, I've put out an amazing episodes on Batman reading and Superman reading in the comics. Great places to start. Great comic books to make you a lifelong fan, as well as a 101 to general getting into comics. And I really think you should check those out if you are actually into getting into the original source material like I am, man. The original source material is just where it's at. The stories are so wonderful. If you read some of these books, you'll understand why so many of us fans are so aggravated about the output that these studios have with these TV shows and these films. Things like the Marvels. Like, they could have made something that we would have really dug, and they could have made something that we would really be excited about. Right now, the Marvels is coming out, and I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit. I don't care. I don't care at all. I don't think I'll see it, honestly. Like, if I don't have to, if my kids aren't like banging on my door. And no, actually, I mentioned this before. My daughter Logan has been like hostile to the Marvels. She's just been like, this movie looks like it sucks. And my daughter's like 14. She should be like, yo, girl power. And she's like, this looks like ass, man. Like she said that to me, and I'm like, can I quote you on that? I didn't put you up to this. Tell everybody, I didn't put you up to it. I didn't put her up to it. She thinks the movie looks like ass. I think the movie looks like ass. I've gone way over time. You can write me at Jesse Blaze at jessesnider.com. I'm on Twitter, Coolest Geek JBS. And yeah, I love you. Thank you for listening. I've got the best fans. You guys are the coolest geeks alive. I love talking about this stuff. I'll see you on Saturday. I'm not sure what I'm doing for this week's episode, but it's going to be great. It's going to be fucking awesome on the next episode of the Coolest Geek Alive. You've been listening to Coolest Geek Alive with me, your host, Jesse Blaze Snider. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more excellent geek culture content. Thanks for listening.
I played that. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Coolest alive. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Stay with your tribe. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Revenge of the Geeks. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Week after weeks. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Laughing with you. It's gonna be fucking awesome. And crying sometimes too. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Spilling it out. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Making you shout. I'm a genius. I got lyrics coming out me bum for days. You like that? It's a kazoo solo. I played that too. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Talking some shit. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Living your shit. My voice is fucking awesome. Food in our mouth. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Get in the mouth. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Tell all your friends. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Call right on text. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Raising the bar. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Straight to the stars. It's gonna be fucking awesome. It's starting soon. Straight to the top. Passing the moon. It's gonna be fucking awesome. On with the show. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Ready, set, go. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Fucking awesome. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Just wait. You'll see.
The podcast playground.
You'll all see.